Right. So I sent you on this task to explore the world of coming up with concepts, seeing them, photographing them, more importantly, drawing them so you can embody them, send them through the body, coming up with ideas stimulated by the environment, doing sketches, but also doing these kind of like brain constructs, these forms that inhabit my mind, inhabit the paper, but don't exist out there. These are beautiful too. There's a place for them. And then between these shapes being generated at a meal, on a subway, on a train, where I can sit alone and do them, they're important to trigger other things. I do not want you to do Eiffel Tower or Hello Kitty for 3D printing. I want you to understand these parametric forms of design principles, whether they're human beings in conjunction with machines or not, create these generative structures, have this comprehensive view, look almost like organisms, skeletons, structures, but are kind of that intermediary place between the human mind and the computer AI. So that's what I want you to do. I draw daily, I write daily. Here's another looking at the picture plane divided up. Okay, so what you go out there, and usually, and this year it's continued, I'm teaching in a summer month in Italy, sometimes in Korea, and I'm asking the students, I'm asking myself every time I go. It's an infinite pleasure to go and be stimulated by another culture, society. What are we looking at? It took you down into the middle of a parametric ring. Do this, understand it, compose it. You could lay it out with the golden section. But when we're walking amongst chaos, getting away from the rigidity of having to do something to earn a buck, to prove our productive existence, we're just creatively applying structure to the world. And let's alternate the binary between chaos and rigidity. The rigidity of having to turn a buck to pay rent is contrast with this notion of travel. You're traveling with resources, flight, daily stipends, hotels, we have to sleep. And you're entering into another order. What are you seeing? Why are you seeing what you want to see? So this is La Bella Figura, a quick talk on superimposing order over onto reality. This is, I've stared at this many times, it's the Palazzo Farnese in off of Piazza Farnese, just off of Campo di Fiore in the center of Rome, designed by Michelangelo, and did an analysis for projection mapping, which we'll get a taste of projection mapping to do. I impose these lines over it. I use a graphics program to make reference of the lines and make reference of the many lines, both in a rigid form with the golden section and a willful, personally employing personal volition to what I am seeing. Veronica Franco, the great 17th, 18th century Venetian courtesan, who essentially was one of the kingmakers, administrative heads of Venice at its decline as more commerce happened in the Atlantic, less in the Mediterranean. But she, as a highly educated courtesan was integrated into the pinnacle of politics, economics of Venice. So furthermore, we have the chaos of people moving for economic reasons. They're starving to death. Here's a group of Sicilians setting up shop in Lower East Side to be productive, to leave the chaos of starvation, as many 19th century Europeans did when they came to America, Argentina, Australia, Canada. They're trying to get a foothold. So you see the children even making, I don't know what they're making, collars or something like that. The sewing machine was the computer of 120, 150 years ago. I don't know when Singer invented it, the individual sewing machine, but it allowed for an explosion in the fabric industry, which is a lot of what drove 19th century industrialism. So I'm asking you to examine 3D printing as a new form. We see a mother there with her children. She's working on the single sewing machine, which wasn't inexpensive but could drive the economy of cottage industries in Lower East Side, in Manhattan, which was part of the first study of overcrowding and the chaos of urban centers. Being close to work for the arrival after the German, English, Irish were the Irish, the Jewish, the Italian, the Slavic, European peoples who were escaping Europe for various reasons, landed Lower East Side, coincided with the invention of the sewing machine. So if they were agricultural Italians or Jews from the Pale, open agricultural areas, they were now positioned inside small apartments with this little machine, trying to eke out a living through it, much like today. And our whole internet economy. Thus, I'm trying to train you into just beyond footnotes and well-balanced sentences. I'm trying to get you into one or two different software tools, such as SketchUp, VPL. DAWs are fun, but they teach you certain things about filmmaking. And then into collaborative spatial social VR in the form of spatial.io. Furthermore, here's Lower East Side. I use this golden section to impose chaos on the supposed disorder. There's a seeking of the comprehensiveness of cities. There's a seeking out of what they should become: coherence, circularity, resilience, community, compassion. And that the second thing going around: cognition, cooperation, culture, calories, keeping the food flow to the city, commerce, complexity and concentration. So again and again and again, the artist, us. Again, I am teaching a humanities arts subject in a Tier 1 research STEM school. There's already a developed ethos of let's call it quantification and taxonomics applied to everything, kind of a materialist, positivist view, but I'm turning that on its head, saying that for some reasons, and the reasons for analysis and reinvention, change, which is part of our culture, that we want to look at even a subject such as changing context. We have to be flexible. We have to be energized and return back to a stability. So these people who made it out of Lower East Side And now the rents of Lower East Sides are astronomical, $3,000 to $5,000 a month for a one-bedroom apartment that was considered impoverished, concentrated, and squalid 130 years ago. Why? Big whys. Why in the major confluence of urban sprawl, the tri-state area, probably in the world, even bigger than the concentration in LA. Why do we seek an order? This is an aesthetic order, and then turn into other forms of complex systems with their own chaos. Vitruvian Man of Da Vinci, like the other Renaissance people, were obsessed with imposing almost cookie cutter order over the top of what they considered natural processes of evolution, but he restudied the musculature of human beings. There it is. That's something the Egyptians and the Pythagoreans and maybe even older cultures in India and China had determined intuitively. Here it is in 1.61803. The Fibonacci series, the Phi series, again, going all the way back to the mysterious figure of Pythagoras, a Greek Egyptian in northern Egypt, might or might not have had these cults that arose from this number, health cults, social cults, did maybe settle in Sicily, near Syracuse. What was this number as a resonance in the Mediterranean? And you still can find it. So this lecture here is a little travelogue to, you might be just wandering around the strip malls of Long Island, but you're also still looking for order. You make personal, volitional sense of order, which gives you happiness in one form. There it is as a rectangle. Instagram went to the square. You can see the square. It's supposedly stable, supposedly adds room for text below or above, but it responds to the length of the phone. Supposedly the phone is this working out, if I can get mine, working out Samsung S20 of that golden proportion there, and so forth. And I led you to the capacity to draw from that. The face, there it is. The little red square is Instagram, but it implies, by nature, it implies an energy that goes beyond it. This is something Pythagoras spread with his we assume it might have been a committee, followers through the Eastern Mediterranean, Egypt, Sicily, Greek islands, and so forth. We find these in books, in web pages. We find these proportions reapplied. There it is again, the phi proportion. We can balance this equation on both sides a couple ways. But with it, we see a balance, an energy towards growth, an energy toward recursive sort of analysis within. This might be some way where we get away from what I say, the chaos of sentimentality and kitsch as the dirty word starting with K, kitsch, overindulgence. It is Eiffel Tower and Hello Kitty, just the ability or the energy or just the robot bean counting to produce what has been done before. It could involve copying, derivative things. The analysis of the golden section, or your analysis using various algorithms of your life. Am I happy? Am I fulfilling desires? And do I have ambition? Do I have these things imply an outward movement from the squares of stability, rigidity. It's a dynamic explosion or implosion in either form. In either way, it supposedly mitigates the chaotic notions of sentimentality and kitsch. There it is again, 1 point square root of 5 over 2. I guess I got throttled. There is a walkway in, I think it's up on the near Termini in Rome. Just seeing how architecture frames the bodies in Rome, in Italy, as a deeply Mediterranean culture still existing with, let's just say, this ancient Pythagorean desire for order, to find beauty in chaos, to find beauty in individual acts of family, friends. It is a very warm and embracing country, but it is always a country that's always absorbed its invaders, so that the invaders are invaded themselves, so that they choose to operate under these Italian sort of individual applications of chaos, of order over chaos, in a land that is seemingly so beautiful, elegant, and orderly. We come across beautiful moments in the space. I think this is my photo of just catching a figure against the background, the ordered phi proportion of the building. This is a model exhibiting it's a little longer in proportion, but we're showing both. I think he's got a phi proportion here on his arm. Perfect Mediterranean specimen, making an order out of the chaos of birth and generative form. We see it in the back tailpipe of a Ferrari, studying product design, car design, scooter design, object design, technology design. We see this reapplied, that there is a comprehensive sense to things. What I do, immersive environments, creating an environment, a backgrounding to the foreground of objects at hand, services at hand, and social living at hand, and the landscapes in Italy. You cannot look from the walls of Assisi down on the valley below and not see some sort of order out there, especially in the Tuscan region, where everything seems, you're naturally inclined to frame it off verticals against horizontals. You have la brutta figura, but we have people who are not afraid to get out there and be honest about what they have done with their lives, what age. There's an acceptance. It's not just like a California shallow plastic surgery from both men and women. It's also a land of honesty. So la bella figura mixes with la brutta figura, which is the brutal image, the ugly image. Not saying she is ugly, but it's this type of honesty. It's the Italian form of yin and yang. But you have a lot of people posing in their cities. It always seems like they are this is up on the Campidoglio. They're always on a stage set about to make their entrances. This is the beautiful theatricality of the piazza, that you have Monica Vitti and Antonioni, a director and his muse, working on films. You have it in dance, in fluidity, in 4D design. You have it in most of the cities. So this is Capri, the city square of Capri, which is on the hill, a protective center in a place. Capri means sheep, a place of shepherds, but also a very elegant, beautiful place. Now that had founded on this idea of greater hilltop security from marauding Saracens and pirates and Islamic pirates. The Amalfi Coast was a coast of pirates. And so out of the comprehensiveness of fort-like, citadel-like protection comes beauty. We have the American version, the Rat Pack, trying to reimpose some form of aesthetic over the top of the chaos of immigration of American. So you have Italo-Americans, Jewish Americans, African Americans, everyone trying to reapply this bella figura. Most of the times it was indulgent and not critical, self-critical. So we have a de-evolution to the kitsch, I think. Here's a shot I snapped walking down a Rome street. Again, everyone is interested in looking their best. They're not always aware of who is looking at them, but they're aware of the potentiality of it. We, in more of a northern, more of a colder climate in North America, except for California and Florida, of course, have a different view. I contend, do not detach ourselves from our little rooms, our little studies, and now our little computer rooms and our little isolated cells during COVID as easily as these people reattach themselves to the piazza. And often it does not take a car to drive to piazza. The car is a detached room. What is important is the ambiguity of onstage, offstage, moving there. I hope you find this in your club design. The ambiguity of onstage, offstage has a social cleansing feature, where you do care about what a possible audience might think, regardless of age, regardless of body type, and so forth. And this cleansing function, the ambiguity between watchers and actors, and not the culture of the American flaneur, is desirable. The villas, this is Villa Giulia, is a reflection of that idea of bringing order to nature around you. The villas of Italy are extremely beautiful, cloistered, borrowing from the centuries-old idea of the Persian walled garden. Very important. That concept went east to Japan, and the Japanese refined it into their own kind of Zen gardens, and to the west, primarily to Italy. The Italian version of the Persian cloistered wall, house, room, cloistered garden within an urban setting is within as you can see with the wall, a defensive area, is important to bring nature inside, creating order. Order in buildings. This is Alberti's church in Florence. I forget the name. Looking for self-care, idea of the self, and orchestrating the narratives of clothing, the narratives of hair, the narratives of appearance. We've alternated between a very puritanical culture and northern climate, and then our own critical forms of modernity often criticize this ability to turn the self into anything it wants to be. We say that, but the choices are socially conditioned. Are they? Less so in Italy, when you have a range of, or any other Mediterranean country, when you have a range of behaviors. There is also a deep-seated conservatism there also, but the idea of personal agency reapplying over reality is still there. I hope, I've got a frozen face. Even in the impoverished areas, there's still ideas of harmony. Lower East Side again, finding order, finding a sculptural sense within the people. Square root of 2, square root of 5, square root of 3. All these things have a mathematical bias. This is my shot looking down at the valley below Assisi, below the citadel city, Etruscan built. The Romans built on plains, they built in square sort of grids. The Etruscans built on hilltops. And you can see it in Assisi, you can see it in Siena, you can see it in San Gimignano, Florence was built, Roman built, on near a river for commerce. Of course, they had it pretty well defended by the soldiers. But next to Rome is Fiesole, which is a Etruscan town on the hill. This is a view from the hill. This is a view, my photograph, a view from Capri, looking down on the northeastern end of the island. It's extremely beautiful. Malaparte, the beautiful modernist orange house is set in the landscape. There's a response of order to the so-called disorder of landscape, which is what landscape painters have done, but there's a great sense of buoyancy in finding the medium. This is my photograph of Ponte Roto, from Trastevere to Campo di Fiori. Old 2000. Ponte Roto is the one on the Isole. This is Ponte Sisto, I think. Still functioning, beautiful functioning Roman bridge. Baroque sculptures on top of it. So it's been starting with the very adept Roman engineering. We have a continued dialogue through time in both utility and beauty. The inclusion of a basic nice meal, well presented, not particularly expensive, inclusion of wine during the midday. These are all very Italian weekend type things. Through this lecture, and as you're making your 3D printable things, I hope to get to the 3D printing of houses and larger structures too. Think about, get away from your bean counting and the way that a university is teaching you how to maximize capital accumulation merely. And then the rest of the stuff is kind of accidentally reapplied to that major materialist drive in your life. This is the sort of empty functioning of a more or less materialistic culture of universities. Devoted, yes, to diversity, but now devoted to just the technologies of capital accumulation, the newest skills. Why I'm teaching you the process of de-skilling the generation before in order to hopefully take their jobs. That's an operation, but also, as we saw in the movie, another inclusion within our own generation of greater automation skills, which were formerly professional, medical, certainly legal, professorial, which does include human beings. We see an attack on that notion of university. The STEM university is only out there to maximize capital accumulation. Serendipity through my shot through the St. Peter's, St. Mark's in Venice, Architecture becomes a ornament and a set piece, but also a background, also a frozen music, also a system of frozen values of that time, existing at the mercy of the elements. Venice might sink. Is one current thought. Reapplying this to the Boboli Gardens behind at the Palazzo in Florence, the Prada showroom in Manhattan, where we lack every bit of word, signage, so forth. Even the price tags, you have to go up and then you have to ask one of the beautiful attendants what the price of something is. There's a real monastic feeling to this, a classical, an eternal thing like the Italian piazza, but in this there's also something modern, and there's something definitely so anti-consumerist, like listing the price or signage, or compare this to H&M or Old Navy, that it becomes hyper-consumerist. Each bag is worth $4,000-5,000. The suits are very expensive. The marketing itself is trying to differentiate, and here is the order within the space. This is way, way, way old, turn of the 21st century. The idea of transparency in the Mac world. Where we have a bunch of slick, beautiful people communicating with their slick, beautiful screens. Again, contrast the screens to the so-called chaos of the piazza, but the piazza has kind of a psychological lung function and breathe. You can breathe your character out again. You can transform your character from the mere state of being a flaneur, a disembodied sort of viewer in society, surfing TikTok, surfing YouTube, surfing your strip malls, into an idea of integrating the self into this setting. And compare that to the late industrial scheme in America, the idea of the managerial culture, the organization man by William White, the returning GIs, reapplying the philosophy of leapfrogging, bringing, invincible force to one point and then outward. These are soldiers. These are soldiers who don't care about aesthetics. The body keeps the score. Their bodies have deteriorated from reapplying these industrial methods to managerial capitalism. So there's less, they're not going to hit Equinox Gym later. They're going to take an hour and a half train ride to Long Island or Connecticut from Manhattan. And their home, which is their castle, has a equal alienation from spouse, children, so forth. But this is so much like what we would find at the landing on the beaches of Normandy. What are we doing here? Are we winning or are we losing? Looks like we're losing from the chaos around us. And certainly other things, unhealthy diet, smoking, drinking, all these things that tend to move around la brutta figura. Here are the cubicles that you might face, and your task is to create some sense of agency, some sense of motivation within these very antiseptic structures that are meant to strip down your individual egos. As you can see, even the partitions aren't high enough so that you don't see over them. Back to the room, the machine that made it all possible, the sewing machine and the computer, have a sibling relationship of cottage industry jobs. These people weren't going to work in, child labor was illegal, but yet we have children working. Um, uh, uh, the whole economies were transforming. I read recently that the invention and the dissemination of the washing machine did more to emancipate American and European women than any other invention, um, which could be right. The sub-economy of the household was as rigorous and brutal as the factories next to them where they went to work. I'm currently in a Garden City modality of English, Ebenezer Howard modality, where the workers from here would walk 2 blocks other side of the highway from me to the Remington factory, munitions factory, where at one point they made 60% of the bullets for all of America and the world, I guess. I'm seeing other statistics. The men went off to their dirty jobs. We still see this. I was living in Singapore. They would populate a work site with container cars, which I'm making you use in your nightclubs. So this was a change in economics from the agrarian societies, where there was probably no less brutal sort of realization, brutality of possibility of starving with the caprices of nature. Nature was held with a respect, but also with the possibility of change and order. This was not. The myriad things that come out of looking at these forces. This is an Italian chair museum in Milan. This is an American ideal of the returning soldier, of formerly working class or agrarian children who've entered the big city. He's got a big managerial job. They paid for this house with $4,000 or $5,000. She might have gone to college or not. She's devoting her first part of her narrative toward having babies. This is the Eisenhower era ideal. Again, no less sort of martial or military, or no less different than what was applied on force to so-called overcome fascism in the world, that you apply extreme order. Your idea of order, the American ideal of order, was overproduction. These houses were overproduced. The idea that you maintain this life, the pre-critical, embodied modernist, pre-feminist, the racial tensions were in general very high before the civil rights movement, but this was the staged ideal. On the inside too, no piazza. You brought your friends in for cocktail parties with gin and tonics. You played jazz on your hi-fi, your stereo system, and you were slowly taking on the trappings of a new middle class, a managerial middle class that pushed papers, that rode the train and the subway with the man in a gray flannel suit. And as a man, you see in the movie Mad Men, the men could do what they wanted to do, have the dividends if they were successful. The women had to skirt around with their own sub-economies in the era before a wider reading of Betty Friedan, Simone de Beauvoir, the first generation feminists, which actually started with Mary Wollstonecraft, who was the mother of the author of Frankenstein, was one of the first feminist writers over 200 years ago. Sophia Loren, as embodying the bella figura, of the feminine in Italy, certain manifestations of that between easy, accessible to eternal Mediterranean beauty. James Dean as the masculine idea, the guy who was going to avoid the organization man of the late 40s, 50s, 60s. He died after his fourth film, which is even perfect. Marilyn, the goddess of America, also died or was killed or whatever. In her time, early 60s, these were, in a capitalist scheme, these were tragic figures. These were figures impossible with their own avoidance of the order, yet embodied it. James Dean embodied more or less a beatnik response to the organizational man, the man in the great flannel suit. Here's Jane Mansfield and Sophia Loren here. This is the American sort of excess, the grasping toward kitsch, the grasping toward sentimentality and excess. We see the excessive Jane Mansfield with Sophia, a famous photograph, Sophia Loren looking on. This is the headshots of James Dean looking pensive, representing some new aspect of masculinity, the bad boy, the renegade, the outsider, the eternal youth, died in youth. That's the order. Back to Palazzo Farnese. How can something this classical, which is not really, it's designed by the facade designed by Michelangelo, give a restructured reinterpretation of Roman orders? And we can see it in everything. We can see it in flea markets, Giotto, I like these so-called little men shops around Rome, where even the men have their little toiletries and micro worlds structured so that they can combine their own personal sense of olfactory pleasures, grooming pleasures, smoking, tobacco, something more on the masculine line. I'm talking old school Mediterranean masculine lines. Cappuccino makers, coffee machines in Italy are this idea of transformation. I used to sit at this cafe for hours with 2 or 3 batteries, swapped into my laptop when I could. This is the bar at the corner of Santa Maria and Trastevere, watching, completing my research on this idea of the psychological city lungs are actually this ability to oscillate between spectator actor and avoid the flaneur, avoid the easy way out was just to be the fly on the wall. So I'd stick my table out there and watch the activities and type it up and hope it was more than just a sea of ink. It leads somewhere. The idea of the Mediterranean feminine, which is an idea of an order of the feminine, maybe no less strong. The tragic image of Marilyn is another archetype that extends into further generations. Who was she? A country girl moving from an impoverished working class background, Norwegian American second generation immigrant, becomes the object, the goddess of sexuality, sensuality in America. Idea of what and this scene from 7-Year Itch, Tom Ewell there is got his wife upstate, and he's quickly very enamored with the single girl in the city, Marilyn, who seems available to him, even though she's probably out of his class. But then she ends up tragically, with a great deal of ambiguity with her relationship with Robert Kennedy and so forth. So kind of a microcosm of American ambition toward chaos. Same with Elvis, tragic, dies on the toilet with medicinal prescription drugs. So he's prescribed beyond belief alcohol, drugs, prescription drugs, not even recreational, to take away the pain. The body keeps the score. We have this image of him bloated, performing in his onesie on stage. Again, like with James Dean, Marilyn, Elvis, we see this white working class progression from the obscure, the alienated workplaces around the world. He's poor, white, a Southern boy. James Dean was from Indiana, Midwestern guy. Marilyn originally, I think, is from California with roots back to Minnesota. Judy Garland, a Minnesota girl. These people came from the left field, out of the woods, transform either from James Dean, an agrarian guy, to another stature, which could be going beyond the organizational man. But think of the tens of thousands, millions of men who got their taste of organization in the military, American military of World War II, and reapplied it to tourism, to the suburban city, to transportation, the car, industrial processes. And then we have the woman of the 21st century. What is this? What is the blank slate? Where is the Mediterranean aesthetic sensibility? Same thing with the man. The gaze is averted. Who is she? Monica Bellucci with this sense of the Mediterranean, which between a northern and a southern, north of the Alps, south of the Alps, we find this kind of dissettling idea. Is it a sexualized image? Is it a classical image? Is it an image of a victim? Is it an image of a victor? What is the notion of the bella and the brutta figura within the obviously bella? And Michelangelo was continually working this out in scenes of war. What is the bella within the brutta? George Clooney's face, Leonardo's face, divided up into the golden section with horse sketches below it. Your heartbeat, dum-dum. The great asymmetry of self-generating forms, and so on. The BMW, which a lot of their designers, engineers studied at Pininfarina, so even every car company across the world has this sensibility. The Ferrari, again, which is deep in the epicenter of this realm between the bella and the brutta figura. The Last Supper, the Annunciation by Da Vinci, where we see the vanishing point, order, everything. And as we said earlier, we talked about what the vanishing point was, a secular idea toward divinity out there. Somehow it's an eye, a sentient eye looking back, the eye of history now, maybe in a secular sense. Even though portraying religious scenes, Gabriel makes the Annunciation to the Madonna that she's pregnant, and the rest of the landscape is ordered, reflecting that order of that chaotic mystery. All right. Here it is again, quiz on Monday. Dividing up, dividing up, dividing up, dividing up. Looking at objects, things. This is a Daewoo car, with engineers designing this at Pininfarina in northern Italy. Sections, cars with gull wings next to objectified women. What's this? Oh, this is Alfa Romeo. What's this? the entrappings, the sort of ordered entrappings of all of it. What's it supposed to mean? Once you have this, you will get this. This is almost like a syllogism. If this, then this. Sexist, yes. Pertains to this materialist agenda, yes. All of that other good stuff in order. Alfa Romeo front, I'm very much enamored by the Alfa Romeo. This grille is not changed in 70, 80 years. But the sort of lighting there's a tendency to sort of anthropomorphize the front. Interiors are vastly important as the detachable room. Even in the Range Rovers, we see a new orderly arrangement of lights. These overlap, these are separate. 2 or 3 lectures ago, I talked about the problem of the square. How do you make squares make emotions in a framed off area, and we kind of determine how do you not make them emotions, that it's the idea of imposing some sort of emotionality within the square. As we get these 2 circles conjoin, these are separate, there's 4 of them. What does that mean? It's only one section of the Range Rover. What and how does that make the Range Rover coveted? Again, this is a setting by Armani. Minimalism, the modernist form that if you strip everything down to its minimalist pre-commodity level, that people can build up the commodity. You can commoditize the self, of course, which is what the critics of the neoliberal capitalist algorithms are against. That eventually we are, with our cell phones, very adept at self-commoditizing, putting on a new skin, taking it off at will, and finding a dissatisfaction through it. More settings, more settings, more settings, settings. Yes, we write about a lot. Landscape paradigm, we see this in applying order to everything out there. Nature as wilderness, it's out there, it's separate from us. Nature as wilderness is the new kind of hunter-gatherer thing, where we went out to find meat, to eat meat, to increase the caloric value of our diets as 5 to 20,000 persons. In the Homo sapien of beginnings in South Africa, Southeast Africa. Of course, there were hominids before us, perhaps many. I think the number's up to 7 or 8 or 9, depending on what crossovers there are with this hominidic explosion. Actually, there was an ape explosion in 10 million years ago, so this is not out of the ordinary that this would find gestation. It's a small tribe, so the ability to change quickly, to mutate quickly, is there in a small group. Of course, the trade-off is the chaos of oblivion, the chaos of extinction. We went from number 2 of the hunter-gatherer sensibility of applying order and chaos to 3, agriculture. We're using nature as a form within our settings. These little orangish, yellowish dots represent human settlements and cities. Urbanization, which I also teach. Human settlements end up being large areas. The structure A is the gardens that move through this. I am currently in a garden city in Seaside Village in Connecticut, with gardens everywhere, rose bushes, so forth. So we even see the layering of landscape. But as we see in this model, the middle landscape is the new paradigm coming out of that. What are these areas? these could be back to upstate areas of hunting and so forth. These could be industrial wastelands, which I kind of live around here now, even though these buildings were formed on sort of concentric rings. No longer we sort of encounter the abstraction of nature as wilderness. The nature inside has been abstracted too. The body keeps the score. We pollute our bodies with tobacco, alcohol, stimulants, prescription, as well as recreational drugs. The notion of the inner value of desire and sexuality is treated as something as strange as this, outside of the major confluences into the middle landscape. But we have this mutational ability within the middle landscape to change. So this relates to how I want you to deal with the new tools of 3D printing coming out of CAD forms, sort of stripped down and dealt with in these online JavaScript-based programs, as we saw yesterday in preparing a SketchUp piece of jewelry for printing. Scale is important, and we saw in nervous system the ability to make your own metal ring, silver or gold, which students have done. They made silver rings. Been amazing pieces. And how much of that is remix culture? How much of that is actually originality? We will continue in the next lecture.